Hey, it's Thomas here, and with me today I have Patrick, one of the founders of EcoTech Marine, who's now working with Neptune Systems, doing some really cool things, so you're probably gonna see a lot more of them. How's it going?
Awesome, super happy to be here.
We are going to talk about something really important today. This is a subject that catches a lot of people off guard. It's not something you usually think about until after you've experienced it, which is super unfortunate. So our goal today is to get you guys thinking about it before it happens, and that's tank disasters. Very specifically, today we're going to be talking about power outages.
Absolutely. One thing about a power outage, you need to be prepared ahead of time for when it happens, because if you're not, really bad things can end up being a result. So what do you think happens when the power goes out? It may not be immediately obvious, but the number one thing you need to worry about is, am I going to deplete the oxygen in my tank?
Yeah, that's a big problem. What you got to remember is when the power goes out, that's the entire life support system and it goes down. And you got to pinpoint what's going to be most important first. You know, you might think maybe I got to get the lights on for the corals. That's not the problem. The biggest problem is oxygen depleting. So if your tank has no oxygen, your corals will suffocate, your fish will suffocate, and once things start going south, if something starts dying, it causes this kind of chain reaction effect. As ammonia levels start to rise, it can get messy fast. So the question is, what do you do to stop that from happening? How do you approach fixing the oxygen problem?
Well, when you think about oxygen in the tank, you got to think about how is oxygen getting into the tank and how is CO2 getting out. So you've got this little timer that started. So your power's gone out. Hopefully you've been notified one way or another. And then as the minutes and hours continue to unfold, yes, oxygen is the first thing you need to tackle. Now, the way that oxygen usually gets into your tank is through the surface of the water.
Surface agitation.
The water going down your overflow to a minimal amount, the water in your sump, absolutely the amount of air exchange inside of your skimmer.
Yeah.
We're creating a ton of surface area and gas exchange inside of the skimmer. So when all of that's shut down and you just have the diffusive layer of the display water in your tank, allowing that oxygen to change and replace that partial pressure of oxygen in your tank, water column itself, that really gets out of balance fast.
Yeah.
So creating agitation in your tank is the number one thing you need to do first in the case of the power outage.
Right. So when it comes to creating that agitation, how you'd approach it differently, I'm assuming, if it's a small tank versus a large tank. So let's start on the smaller end, just work our way up. What do you think is an appropriate way to get that oxygenation happening in a smaller system when the power's out?
So you got to think, right? You don't have power, so you need some sort of power source.
Like battery.
And a battery is a great way. There's battery backup solutions that already exist. You can get air stones that create bubbles inside of the tank. That's not only going to create a little bit of gas exchange by the bubbles themselves, but it's going to also create some flow in the tank. At EcoTech, we created a battery backup system for the Vortec, which really creates a lot of flow. You're actually going to have a meaningful movement of water through the tank. And if you move your pump up towards the surface, you're actually going to create a lot more surface agitation as well. Those are two methods that anybody can use on a small tank, but you have to be prepared ahead of time.
Yeah, and I've on smaller aquariums, especially like nano systems, if we're talking like 10 gallons, 15 gallons, even 20 gallons, there are inexpensive battery backup air pumps that actually plug into the wall, detect the power outage, and then will turn on some bubbles for you. And that can work really well on small tanks. The thing is, you don't know how long those batteries are going to last, and the batteries you put in really dictate how long that pump's going to last for you. But I've always been more comfortable having like a proper circulation pump with a battery backup. I know the EcoTech one, like in my experience, I experience power outages way more regularly than I'd like to. They will last many hours on like an MP10 that's turned down.
Yeah, like 36 to 48 hours.
Yeah, which is plenty of time for most people to catch that power outage. But that's usually my way to do it. When you get into larger tanks, do you just do multiple batteries or?
Well, you can put those batteries into series, right? And the other thing that you need to watch out for is the heat of your aquarium. So you have these types of different horizons. You've got your short-term horizon, because your tank and your coral can be at risk 5 hours into a power outage if you have a big bioload. And the bioload needs to be proportional. So if you have a small tank with a lot of animals in it, You know,
You
versus
still need, yeah.
you're going to need something fast.
Yeah.
If you have a large tank like this, but there's a lot of animals, okay, again, right, you need to act very quickly. A large tank with a small bioload, you may be okay.
There's more oxygen to go around for a longer period of time. It's like a smaller person with the same size oxygen tank who's diving is going to go through that oxygen a little slower than somebody who's way bigger and has bigger lungs and is breathing more.
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So that makes a lot of sense. So with a larger system for long term, like short term, we said 48 hours. What happens when it's long term?
Well, you're going to have a different set of problems, right? If you have a power outage, let's say if you live in Canada, if you live in Florida, somewhere that gets power outages quite often, you're going to be aware that you have to deal with this thing and deal with this problem because it happens. Where I think you're in a lot of danger is if you live in somewhere like, let's say, Texas, and all of a sudden they had that freeze a few years back, and everybody was caught with their guard down, right? Because it doesn't happen very often. Well, that doesn't mean it never happens. It's the law of averages.
Murphy's Law, man.
Right. Exactly. So the other thing that you need to think about, which will be your next barrier to surpass, is the heat. So if it's cool in your house or it ends up being hot in your house because of the power outage, you need to tend to that. So what does that mean? That means that running something more like a generator that's
It's
actually
going to make a lot more sense.
going to allow you to run heaters to keep your temperature at the prime rate. And if you're running a generator, you can basically power your entire reef and not have to worry about it.
That's exactly what I do. I'm going to admit it. I go through power outages at least 3 times a year, like minimum. And I have my battery backup on there to make sure that if I'm not home, because obviously I'm not always home, I'm here right now, I've got a way to like get that circulation started and to make sure everything coasts until I can get to the tank. And then I start that generator and I literally plug everything in from the tank into that generator. It goes right to my house, to my breaker board, and I make sure that the breakers that run the tank are on. Specifically for that reason, because instead of getting too cold or too hot, rather, I have the issue of it getting too cold in the winter because that's when all of our power outages are.
Yeah.
So I got to keep it moving. Otherwise, if the tank's not heated, the tank's not getting circulation, it goes sideways very quickly.
So I think what you're suggesting is there's a hybrid strategy here where you've got your short-term solution for batteries, and then you've got your long-term solution for a generator. Now there's different styles of generators. You got gasoline versus propane. Now personally, I started out with a little Yamaha 1500 watt generator, and that was my solution for running my router and different things in my small aquariums. Now I moved to a new house and got a larger tank. Now I had to buy a bigger generator to be able to power, and I chose to power my entire house minus a few things. Like I got to turn off a few different aspects, some of the heat, some of my charger for my car.
I don't care about my fridge. The fridge can wait. It's my tank I care about.
So, but that's still a manual process. So if I'm traveling, that's not setting itself up.
No.
Right? I have to go into my shed. I have to wheel out. It's got to be like a 400-pound generator machine. So wheel that across my yard, get it up onto my porch, plug it into my house, and let's hope the thing is charged. Well, the battery for starting it's charged, right? That has to trickle charge all the time. And then make sure that the gas is still good, that the gas didn't go bad, that the oil is good. There's a lot of things that need to be lined up perfectly for this thing to happen.
Yeah, it's not something you can just get and then have sit in your garage for 2 or 3 years until that time happens that you need it and then expect it to just work. It's one of those things you kind of have to maintain, which is actually a really good point because, like, look, I have a generator, but if a power outage, I don't think it's going to last very long or I'm home for it, I will not pull that generator out until I'm like, okay, the tank needs the generator now if I'm home for it, because the battery backup can be enough most of the time. You don't want it to be, oh, I don't have battery backup because I have a generator. Because if that happens, or you just don't want to go through the whole rigmarole for like a 2-hour power outage of dragging that thing across your lawn and then plugging everything in, it's nice to have like phase 1, my battery backups are on there, they're taking care of it, gives me time to worry about the generator and deal with that. If the generator is not running for some reason, you have some leeway to actually make sure it gets running so that you can then use it.
Absolutely.
It's like the heavy duty option, and it's definitely a great option for longer term problems.
Now, like if money's no object, or you live in a place where power outages happen all the time, The gold standard here is to get one of those whole home generators, ideally powered by either natural gas or propane with one of those large 1,000-gallon tanks.
Yes.
And that's going to automatically switch your house from line voltage to the generator in the case of a power outage.
So it's like it never happened. Everything just keeps running in your house as per the usual. But they be expensive units.
You got that?
They're also huge, dude.
Oh yeah, it's a total pain in the butt. Now, and they have to exercise themselves and go on every week. That's kind of loud, kind of noisy. All you people out there with those big battery backup walls, they're making.
Oh, like the power banks, like
the power banks.
yeah.
That's another great option. Again, not cheap, something for your tank.
But that's also like an option for your whole house at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you have like a big tank with like pets you care a lot about that are worth a ton of money, that kind of investment makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
All right. So what is your method for, if you say you're away, you're on vacation, and your power goes out, how do you find out?
Well,
Does somebody call you? Do you have a tank sitter or?
Yeah, I do have somebody come check in on it, but like who knows? Like maybe it's overnight. So I use a controller that will notify me with a heartbeat if it's lost connection. Because how do you know that the tank's gone down? Well, I have 3 tanks, all work with controllers. So it's very rare for everything to go, and have a problem at the same time. So if I see that happen, I know I can take action quickly.
Yes.
And the only way that a controller can know whether or not the power is out is that heartbeat, right?
Yeah. So it has to, basically how the heartbeat works is it's sending a signal to the server or the cloud saying, hey, and the cloud's talking back to it. If the cloud tries to contact that controller and the controller's not available, nobody's answering the phone, it then sends you a message to like your mobile device to say, hey, you got to check up on this because I can't get a hold of your controller. And the nice thing is, even if you don't have a controller, there are all kinds of devices now that, some of the lights will do it. C-Chase pumps do it. The SDC pumps, they have an ability to tell you that, hey, I can't talk to the pump right now. Can you check what's going on? And then you have a way to actually get to it first. Because if your whole family's on vacation and nobody's walking in your home, like I personally put auto feeders on my tanks. So like if I'm gone, I don't have to worry about my fish eating. If you don't find out for like 3 or 4 days, you're gone for a week, let's say, and then your battery backup starts. Yeah, then you're toast. So like make sure you have something on the tank that's able to send you that message so that even if you're not around, you can call somebody who is around and be like, hey, can you go check my tank right now, please?
Another good strategy that I've actually implemented on my own system is that if you can use UPCs, which is a battery that's going to actually invert or create the 110 voltage for your house, and put that on your router and on your cable modem, you can get these pretty inexpensively. You can actually log in because a lot of times power goes out, but the internet's not down.
Right.
So you can actually log in and then you still get access to your controller or the cameras on your tank. And then you can still see, okay, let me check in. Maybe it's just a blip in the internet. Well, I guess in that case, you would know.
That would be best case scenario.
If the
internet's just down,
out,
that's the best case scenario.
Yeah, but if the power were to go out, you could still see if everything's okay or how things are going.
Right on.
Or if your generator didn't kick on. I mean, you can find out a lot that way.
Now, we were talking a little bit earlier before we started this about some pretty cool experiments you were thinking of running to see how long a tank can go without oxygen or how fast the oxygen drops. When you think it'd be, I personally find this stuff super fascinating. Anytime we can put like some tangible data and make it a little bit more real, because just saying, we can look at our tanks and see that when the power's off, how long it takes before fish start gasping at the surface. But if we have like a solid baseline for when that might actually happen first.
Yeah, we were thinking about measuring the relative level of oxygen. Now, Neptune does make an oxygen sensor. It's generally used by larger aquariums. But I think if we did an experiment and found out, well, how fast does the oxygen get depleted in a few different scenarios? Because interestingly, I think the corals themselves, they respirate at nighttime.
Yes.
And so you're going to be consuming that oxygen. If the power of the lights over your tank have gone out during the daytime, they could just very rapidly consume the oxygen. And what I would like to know is how big of an impact does that have relative to the fish population? If you have a big versus a small fish population. So
Like if it goes down faster in a fish-only tank versus like a full-blown reef, or if
Or
the biomass
or
of
the
coral-
opposite of that.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a lot coral, we have a tank at our office, and the bio load of the coral is actually bigger than the fish, I think. So as opposed to, this tank is pretty heavy on coral too. I think more coral than fish, you know, pound for pound here. So as that begins to change and as you begin to draw down that oxygen, what method of aeration might be more or less effective? How effective is an air stone versus if you were to keep your Vectra on a battery backup or your return pump, allowing that full turnover from your whole aquarium and the sump versus if you had an MP10 on the surface, as an example.
Or like even how close the MP10 has to be to the surface before we start seeing those oxygen, like the oxygen level returning.
If you'd like to see content on this, give a comment down, you know, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us in the comments below. This stuff tickles my brain. I love being able to put more science behind the theories because, you know, we can make things work. We have a lot of practical experience. The hobby as a whole tends to figure these things out generally, but once we throw data to it, we can really like nail it down and make sure everybody's on the same page and able to make sure their tanks survive through these terrible situations.
Little known fact, Radions used to have a battery backup port.
Did they really?
Yep.
Was that, when did they stop? Gen 2, 3?
You were telling me today, you had a Gen 1.
I did have a Gen 1.
That
when they had the silver like...
Do you remember the power supply?
Yes, it was the white, that was a beefy power supply.
It had a little jack on the front.
It did?
You remember that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
A little known fact, I don't even know if we advertised it.
I'm not sure you did.
It kicked on the red LEDs, and the idea here was to prevent the corals from going into consuming oxygen. Man,
so now you got to test that and then perhaps even bring it back.
I think we gotta at least consider it.
Oh, for sure. Dude, this was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun talking about this. I'm hoping that everybody's got a better grasp of how to approach a power outage. Just to like, if there's one thing you take away from this conversation, it is don't get caught unprepared. At least bare minimum, have some sort of battery backup air pump if it's a small tank, or some form of battery backup, even in the form of an APC for one of the pumps inside your display if it's a larger tank. And have some piece of equipment, whether it's a full-blown controller or just one piece of equipment that's connected to your phone, so that if the power goes out, you know about it when you're not home. And just be able to react when that situation happens, because not being there for it can be catastrophic. And that breaks my heart. I would hate for anybody to lose their tank. So yeah, Patrick, thank you so much, brother. This is a blast. We've got to do another one of these.
Thanks for inviting me out.
Of course, man. Anyways, have a good one.